Welcome into the latest G-Rated, where we review the latest movies and TV shows. I'm your host, Gerald Bourguet, and today I'm joined by a first-timer on the G-Rated program, Bo. Bo, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I never would have thought, 3 months ago, I'd be breaking down Barry, because it was a show I hadn't even started watching by then.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, but to kind of churn through the 3 seasons, and then I was watching in live time the final fourth and final season. I feel like I'm a better person for it.
Okay, I love it. You're a newcomer to Barry,
Right.
which is the show that we'll be talking about today. Just wrapped up its series finale on Sunday, along with Succession. We just did a G-Rated about that yesterday. If you haven't seen it, go ahead and watch that as well. But Barry, I feel like, went under the radar compared to Succession, even though, in my view, it is an all-time show on the same caliber. But let's talk a little bit about that finale. The obvious thing we've got to get to first is the ending. So, spoiler alert, if you have not seen it, now is your chance to turn this off, turn the volume off. But at the very end, we get the death of NoHo Hank. We get Gene Cousineau being the one to get Barry, and Barry's son possibly breaking the cycle through what is an outright lie about who his father was. What were your thoughts on what went down in those last couple of scenes there?
As far as the final moments we see with Barry, where he kind of gets a glimpse of his killer, the first and only time, obviously puts him to his demise after killing so many people throughout his life. And it's his mentor, the person he looked as a father figure in Gene Cousineau. And he was shocked even to the very end, where he says, "Oh, wow." And then he gets the bullet right through the head. And then that's it for Barry. It was just one of those things where it's just like, he was so confused, and he still felt that he was this good guy through and through, right? Despite doing all these horrible things. And then to kind of see, in not the same capacity, obviously Gene Cousineau did some horrible things that we learn about through the 4 seasons, right? Especially 1 through 3,
right?
That he was just a terrible guy throughout his career, and then him to have to kind of pay off all the sins of Barry because it all got pinned on him. But then to see his son get to break the cycle and benefit from that, you're just like, okay, because what Sally says in that final scene with her son, like, "You're a good kid," like, you kind of get the sense that John is a really good kid, and that he gets an opportunity here that he probably wasn't going to get if he's raised by his father, who's pretty delusional. You can see very delusional, despite having, the trying to do the right thing all the time, but it's misguided a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It's funny because we see him literally trying to listen to different religious podcasts to justify the murder that he's planning on committing the whole time he's heading back to Los Angeles. And you're right, if Barry is still around, his son is not going to be raised to be a good person. So ironically enough, by getting his just desserts finally for all the horrible things that he's done, he winds up inadvertently securing his son's future, which I thought was the perfect ironic twist, because this whole time he's worried about, what am I passing on to my son, trying to reform himself, and then failing spectacularly every chance he gets to reform and actually make amends and own up to what he did. Like this whole scene with him and Sally in the bed, where she's like, "You should just turn yourself in." He's like, "I don't think that's what God wants."
That was like it reminded me kind of the movie Shutter Island. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it, but the reference, and it's also another spoiler if you don't want me to spoiler that movie, but where Leonardo DiCaprio's character goes back into his mental illness, and he goes back into, what was it, just this character he's playing, where you thought that he was past that, and it's like, oh man, Barry, you just missed it. Like that's, right. I will say, because we're just recently removed from it, like the cameo of the season when he's listening to so many of those podcasts, looking to justify it. Bill Burr, the comedian, makes a cameo and basically gives him exactly what he wants him to hear, because I think that that's so important, especially when you think about what John's life would have been if Barry was still in it. Even if he was living in prison, like he would have gotten these messages that Barry wanted to tailor to give to his son, instead of maybe, what he wants him to hear instead of what he necessarily needs to hear. And that's what kind of Barry seeks out is maybe a reason to justify all the horrible things he's done in his life. So but that cameo was fantastic.
It really was. I was like, oh my God, they got Bill Burr to play the most perfect, like, gun-toting Baptist but biblical person. Like, that was hilarious.
Right.
Your thoughts on Gene being the one that gets Barry, and the fact that Gene is now going to pay the price, basically, in a literal sense, going to jail for what Barry did for his crimes.
You don't necessarily ever want to see anybody, even your worst enemy, suffer those consequences, especially when he wasn't, truly guilty for that. But I don't think that Gene was innocent by any means. I think he was a pretty terrible person. He had an opportunity, I think, maybe at the end of season 2 going into season 3, where he could have really, righted his wrongs. And then instead, he continues to be just the same horrible person that he was. And in every opportunity that had to go right, he goes back left, right? And as far as, he once again, at the beginning of season 4, he was off the grid, and then he comes back with the right intention to kill this movie, and then he gets drawn in. It's like, hey, we've got Daniel Day-Lewis who's going to play
Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah, and Mark Wahlberg. It's just the most, and it's hilarious, like, because Bill Hader and Alan, was it Alec Berg who wrote this with, like, we're poking fun at their own industry, and you can appreciate that even as being an outsider. But I don't. As much as I don't think Gene deserved to be life in prison, which he likely got, he obviously he wasn't innocent, and as far as truly should he be the one paying for what Barry did? No, but at the same time, it's like I don't think he has a solid leg to stand on either.
Right. I appreciated the fact that it didn't let Gene off early for continually falling into that trap of pride and hubris and ego and wanting his name to be out there. And ironically enough, it does get out there for all the wrong reasons. He's now being accused of these 2 murders, including the murder of the person that he cared most about, arguably. But I do think there is some sort of poetic justice, even if the theme of violence in the show, it comes up often that it's terrible, and that the way that these characters treat it so flippantly, it's almost like it's just another day for them. So I kind of like the fact that Gene is the one that does Barry in, because you don't expect it at all. When you hear the first gunshot, you think he offed himself in the room because of what's getting out about him now. And instead, he kind of takes back his own narrative in a weird way. But I kind of liked that it was it wouldn't have been the person I would have predicted to get Barry.
Right. And it also is just, he continually shoots himself in the foot. Like,
and his son in the chest.
Like here he is, like, here is his out that he, could have just let Barry have the cops show up, and then he would have confessed, and then Gene would have been clear of all these charges, which I thought was a really interesting. I thought that was a nice little wrinkle that they added into the final season. That here's this, like, mega cop, right? The father, and forgive me for, I can't remember his name, but of Gene Cousineau.
Was it Jim Moss?
Yeah, Jim Moss.
Yeah.
So Janice's father, who got it wrong, right? He ended up getting it wrong, and Gene was kind of going to be falsely accused of it, and he would have been free of all this. But there he goes. In the final hour, kind of blows it for himself.
Yep. I really admired what they did with Gene in the end, and how they weren't afraid to hold him responsible for a lot of the things that he did. Same thing with NoHo Hank, honestly.
Yeah. I feel like Hader did a great job in writing this, in kind of in wrapping everything up. And NoHo Hank included, like, you have the moment with the statue and his lover, and like he dies, and then so we've got kind of closure for Barry, Gene, even though it's we know what happens with Gene, and it's not him dying, and then you've got NoHo Hank, and it's like, how do we feel about Sally?
Yes.
Is as well as Hank was resolved, it's like Sally is just kind of stuck in this her entire life, and it continues, I feel like, even post Barry.
It very well could, because she has always been the type that she said she stays for the apology. She's a victim of abuse, emotional, physical, in her past with both her ex and with Barry, being manipulated, being drawn into these toxic relationships. I feel like the biggest sign of growth for her at the very end is not only that she's a little bit more motherly towards John, because she admits in that scene with a younger John that like she's not a good mother. We see her kind of recoil away from her son when they're sleeping together in the same bed in an episode earlier than that. But it's also the fact that like when this new teacher at the whatever school she's now teaching at, like asks her out for coffee or for dinner or whatever, she's like, no.
Yeah, just bluntly, no thanks.
I'm good.
Right.
So I feel like that is her sign of growth, that she's, none of this is going to be fixed overnight. She's going to be traumatized for the rest of her life based on what happened. But I do feel like watching her drive away in the car and the expression on her face, she did find some semblance of relief, of a new life, of getting out of that cycle. And hopefully it continues with John, because as we see at the very end, watching this totally fictional account of what happened with his father and Gene Cousineau, it's based on a lie, but he is at least going to break the cycle in a way.
Well, hopefully.
You never know.
He seems like it. I thought this show as a whole, and I might be getting ahead of it, but it was such a great mix, the ebbs and flows of comedy and drama, and there was a little action, but it was such a obviously dark comedy.
Yes,
can get thrown on a lot of things, because at the end of season 3, you're like, where's the fun?
It's very bleak,
and then they bring it back. But I think that Bill Hader created such a interesting hybrid that I don't know if we've ever seen before, and it'd be interesting to see if anybody ever attempts it again.
Right. It's the shows that have always called to me are the shows that do a great job of mixing humor with very real, very sad things. This leaned more into like the dark comedy, the bleakness of life, as you mentioned. Like BoJack Horseman is another one for me that does a really good job of blending like slapstick, stupid humor with very real scenarios, even though it's an animated show about a horse. But like this one is a real one, and I got to give credit to Bill Hader. The writing and the direction in this show were really incredible. Like he grew so much as a director and a filmmaker, even though it wasn't a film. Like the one shot of NoHo Hank when they're trying to blow up Fuchs's house, where the missile just veers off, and you follow all of this chaos, and it's hilarious at the same time what's unfolding. Him like driving down and getting shot at and like dancing around the bullets and falling down them. Like it's so funny. But it's so well and simply done with the one shot that's way back there. And there's just little camera angles like that in moments where you're like, this dude knows what he's doing as a director.
I think in season 3, that was where like NoHo Hank and Cristobal and Fuchs, you look to them for some comic relief. And it wasn't there at the end of season 3. That was back in season 4. That was great to see. And yeah, I mean, just from when Bill Hader, Barry was on the dirt bike, like so many moments stand out where it's like like these real serious moments, or a guy firing, as you mentioned, a bazooka at a home, like or him going and loading up on guns at the big box store that probably we would just say like in our world would be like a Walmart, right?
Yeah.
And he walks out of there and he can't even get into his car because he's so heavily armed, and you're just like, you can't help but laugh, but at the same time you're just like, man, I wish I could say that was far from reality, and it's unfortunately not.
Right.
But it was just unbelievably like the way that they did that, and how Hader, I'm sure was his brainchild. It was hilarious.
Yeah, just armed to the teeth, strolling down past a little girl, and like that was so funny, but so bleak because it's not far from reality. I do want to ask, who was your MVP, and do you have any complaints or concerns about the final season?
I don't really have. I think that Hader was, and he was up to the challenge, and I see it as watched a bunch of interviews with him, and you realize that this guy really wanted to do service to the loyal fans, the people that watched this show, and it was a passion project that I think turned into something more than he even anticipated, and really wanted to put a bow on it correctly and finish things up. So I don't want to fault him at all, and I don't have any issues with it because I don't know. I don't have an alternative, right? I think he did a pretty good job in resolving it and leaving it to where we can kind of talk about, John and Cousineau and Sally and where Barry would have gone and so many different things. And I think that's great. That's great work. The fact that it leaves that much for people to interpret themselves. As far as my MVP, man, I loved what Henry Winkler did throughout this series.
He's fantastic.
He really was.
He's hilarious.
I mean, he's gone from the Fonz to playing Gene Cousineau in an incredible career. And from everything I've heard, just like Bill Hader, I mean, it seems like these are just great people who are passionate about their profession. I think that Gene Cousineau, he was the one like through and through, like just how absurd he could tap into that character. I think Gene Cousineau was great.
He's so pitiful but believable, but unintentionally funny, but it is intentional on Henry Winkler's part because I'm sorry, but one of the funniest line readings of the entire season was when he thinks it's Barry coming to the cabin door. He goes, "Fuck you!" and like, shoots the gun, and it's his son. Like that was the funniest thing. And there were so many little moments like that where Winkler just commanded the comedy. For me, I might go Anthony Carrigan just because NoHo Hank is like an all-time TV character. Like so funny. And I'm glad in the finale they brought back, or the last couple episodes, they brought back some of his humor because his story did get serious and it was good for the character to not be one note and just comic relief the whole time. But I love the way that his death played out, the way that he was ultimately held accountable for his actions as well, for leading to the death of Cristobal. And just the comedy that he brought to the table. It wasn't as prevalent in this season, but just for the show in general, like he's an all-time great.
Well, and they continued it with NoHo Hank, to the bitter end with him, just the vicious circle that he was fighting and the opportunity to get out, and he just doesn't.
Right.
It's interesting, like Fuchs and John are probably the only two characters that did their best to end that cycle. And, Fuchs might have pivoted at one point if given the opportunity. Fuchs lived, right?
He lived. That was one of my only gripes about the show. I think it was fitting that a character like that, who finally embraced who he is, this whole show is about characters not understanding who they are and how bad or dark or violent they are.
Yeah.
And I think he embracing it and him getting to live is not coincidental. But I do wish there had been a little bit more accountability for the horrible things that he did as well. Yeah. The Raven gets off. He flies away. The other complaint that I had was that Barry's escape from Jim Moss's house was a little too easy and convenient. I felt like a guy like that who had him under VR and had him locked away, he got very distracted by the money that was given to Gene Cousineau. And I understand that he thought that Gene was now his guy who hired Barry, so that would be his priority in trying to avenge his daughter. But I felt like a guy that was that smart, that got Barry not once but twice, would be more capable in that moment. That kind of hurt the believability of it for me a little bit.
They did lean on Moss to kind of his character making a bunch of missteps throughout this to advance the story. And I can see that. I can appreciate that.
Right. Final score out of 10 for the final season.
Yeah, I mean, watchability, especially being a 30-minute episodes. I mean, you could just churn through them, and I enjoyed every episode. And I thought that as far as score, it should rank high, just as far as its the ability to consume it and the emotions it put me through. And the laughs it gave me, and like I said about you could see from the filmmakers or the showmakers as far as Hader and Berg, they clearly cared about this, and I could appreciate that. So I'm going to give it a. Do we do point?
You can do point.
Okay, yeah, I'll do it. I'll give it a 9.2.
Okay, very nice. I'm going to go with a 9.5. I just gave Succession's final season yesterday a 9 out of 10. This one, honestly, I felt like this series finale was up there with like Better Call Saul, Breaking Breaking Bad and BoJack Horseman. So apparently, if you're a show that starts with B, your series
that's who
finale,
Hader said he tapped into.
Yes, he did. He did. So it makes sense, and I love that he was able to end it. It started off as a comedy, a dark comedy. I think it progressed to more than that. It was a drama and it was a comedy at the same time. Those types of shows are rare, and I feel like it really stuck the landing for me in a way that shows rarely do.
And that's what Hader, I heard him recently, I think he was talking to Conan O'Brien about this on his podcast, and he said that that's what he wanted. He said, when you get to know people, you start to see they're just as, effed up as everybody else, and you start to see their faults, and things do get darker as they progress. And, obviously with Barry, things are on the darkest level when you're dealing with the main character is not a serial killer, but a for hire killer,
right?
So I think that I got what you got, and that's what he was trying to convey, and that's a great job. And
just a loaded cast too. Like Bill Hader, before this series, a lot of people didn't know that he could actually act, which he can. Stephen Root was great. Another guy that's usually just used as comic relief. Anthony Carrigan, Revelation. Sarah Goldberg, same thing. She was fantastic as Sally. So just a loaded group. But that's going to do it for this edition of G Rated. You can follow Bo at Bo Brack on Twitter. You can follow me at Gerald Bourget. And until next time, keep it G Rated.